This is Canada, the world's second-largest nation. Situated directly above the United States on the North American continent, Canada and the U.S. have the longest border between any two nations in the world, which is approximately 8,891 kilometers, 5,525 miles long, and bounded on all three sides by the Atlantic, Arctic, and Pacific Oceans. The fact that 80% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. border, in fact 50% of all Canadians reside just south of it, makes the country's geography even more intriguing. The Canadian province of Ontario is responsible for 38% of the country's GDP. The majority of people typically reside in places with access to economic activity. Because of this, these provinces are home to the majority of Canada's biggest businesses, including manufacturing, mining, and real estate. Since the financial crisis, Canadian home prices have doubled, and this colored circle illustrates the percentage rise in prices in each province over the past 10 years. Consumer spending is the driving force behind this housing boom. Canadians were urged to take on more debt in order to purchase homes in 2009 by the government's stimulus plan to support the economy and the central bank's interest rate, which was close to 1%. Because they fear or expect that prices will continue to rise, people are purchasing. Rising interest rates over the past year have temporarily lowered housing costs, but the majority of Canadian renters still believe that owning a home may be out of reach. An Ipsos survey found that 63% of Canadians without a home have given up on ever purchasing one. A Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation (CMHC) analysis claims that immigration has significantly influenced rental demand in recent years. The demand for rental properties is maintained in part by the fact that many newcomers to Canada first rent rather than buy. Canada is not the only country. Rents in the majority of developed nations, such as the US and the UK, seem to be decently priced, but house prices appear to be excessive in comparison. The Canadian housing market is unique because its consumers may be reaching the limit of their borrowing and spending power. Compared to corporations, Canadians spend a larger percentage of housing and investment capital. In this instance, business investment consists of non-residential buildings, machinery and equipment, and intellectual property, all of which together only make up 9.3% of GDP. In contrast, Canada's net stock of residential assets increased 18.9%, or 22% of the country's total wealth, due to robust growth and home investment. A sizable portion of Canadians would prefer to spend money on housing than on a business. Who is to blame? It seems like a fantastic strategy, but when there is no local investment, you begin to question where the employment is coming from. Business investment is essential for promoting economic growth in the economy. Eventually, more goods and services can be produced with the same amount of labor and other resources thanks to business investment, which raises the economy's overall productive capacity through a greater physical capital stock. As a percentage of GDP, Canada actually spends less in business than the US. Both domestic and foreign individuals invest in businesses. The United States is the primary source of foreign direct investment, which makes up Canada's lower level of domestic investment. In actuality, Canadian businesses hardly ever wow the globe. Canadians are more risk-cautious than their relatives south of the border, according to a survey of 900 executives. The fact that 6 of the top 10 firms by revenue on Fortune's list of the largest companies in the world are American or Chinese, while the best Canadian finance manager, Brookfield Asset Management, is ranked just 158, seems unacceptable at a time when Canada's relationship with America is strained. The United States has influenced several of Canada's economy's distinctive features. Canada has established its economic policies and practices in reaction to the impact of its southern neighbor, the United States, with which it shares a close economic relationship. For instance, American businesses have set up shop in Canada mainly to avoid taxes or tariffs, although their headquarters and intellectual property are frequently located in the South. Foreign businesses, particularly American ones, are purchasing a large number of innovative startups in Canada. This is partially due to the fact that small Canadian businesses forfeit tax benefits when they sell their shares on the open market. As a result, small businesses are more susceptible to being purchased by bigger international corporations. As a result, the economy is now less inventive and productive than that of America. To put the disparity into perspective, the average annual salary for Canadians is about $60,000, while the average salary for Americans is about $80,000. In other words, incomes typically rise by over 33% only by commuting a few hours south. While the average American worker generates $74 worth of value per hour, the average Canadian worker only produces $57 worth of value per hour. Americans also put in roughly 3.5% more hours than Canadians. Why can Americans work smarter than Canadians instead of harder? What, therefore, causes the disparity? The largest contributing element is the significant variation in the amount of money spent or invested in capital, innovation, machinery, and tools per worker, a phenomenon known to economists as capital intensity. While U.S. companies spent $20,500 on capital per worker, Canadian companies spent roughly $13,000. Among the G7, Canada, too, spent very little on research and development. As per the World Intellectual Property Organization, the United States generates around twice as many patents per person as Canada. Productivity growth is closely correlated with higher living standards or per capita income in Canada. After accounting for buying power parity, it was $57,800 in 2022, which was around $17,400 less than in the U.S. Because of lower levels of inequality, Canadians at the bottom of the economic scale are now doing better than Americans in similar circumstances. Therefore, this disparity hasn't been a major issue. The income disparities in any given nation are evaluated using a metric known as the Gini coefficient. Perfect equality is represented by a Gini coefficient of 0, while perfect inequality is represented by a value of 1. In the past 42 years, Canada's Gini coefficient has never increased above that of the U.S. Over the course of those 42 years, inequality in the U.S. has consistently been higher than in Canada and has even increased more quickly. Income disparity in Canada has generally been stable over the past 10 years and decreased after 2010, following a substantial increase during the challenging early to mid-1990s. In contrast to other developed economies, the Canadian economy is still less competitive. In terms of competitiveness, Canada is ranked 14th out of 63 countries, which is its lowest rating since the annual poll began in 1997. Aggressive free market economies like Singapore, which is rated 3rd, and the United States, which is placed 10th, as well as progressive nations like Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden, which are renowned for their robust labor laws and high wages, are currently outperforming the nation. A competitiveness index isn't a precise indicator of a nation's ability to compete with other nations. Instead, it's a gauge of a nation's level of productivity, and competition is typically viewed as a catalyst for economic growth, efficiency, and innovation. Even though it was up against fierce competition from bigger and better-funded rivals, Canada was incredibly inventive 10 to 15 years ago. Canada can accomplish its objective of being more inventive and creative in order to remain competitive because it is home to some of the world's most talented and skilled individuals. This is supported by the IMD report, which indicates that Canada has the 11th highest talent ranking in the world. But if you don't use your talent for your country, what's the point? Because they can earn more money south of the border. All the talented individuals are moving there. It's referred to as brain drain. In comparison to several other nations, Canada has historically had fewer government programs to support researchers or businesses. The truth is that investment in other industries like manufacturing, research, and business operations has been deterred by Canada's reliance on natural resources for economic growth. The economy of Canada has been based on natural resources. Mining, timber, oil, and natural gas are its main economic activities. Natural resources made up 51% of Canada's overall merchandise export value in 2021 and directly or indirectly contributed 17% of the country's nominal GDP. Oil and automobiles, Canada's two largest exports, are both on the decline and might stay on the decline. The cost of producing oil from Alberta's tar sands is high, and the United States, its largest overseas consumer, is generating more of its own oil than it imports. Since the 2008 recession, the automobile industry has never fully recovered. From a peak of 3 million vehicles in 1999 to 1.4 million in 2020, production has decreased. The expansion of the services sector, which is doing well, comes next. The communications, real estate, and financial services sectors have all experienced substantial growth in recent years. With one of the biggest concentrations of financial services business headquarters in the Americas, Toronto has emerged as a new financial center in North America. Additionally, Canada's financial system is among the most sound in the world and has been ranked top in the G7 for the 11th consecutive year. Though many may question it, Canada's banks are cautious, well-regulated, and unaffected by excessive competition, which helped them weather the global financial crisis better than America did. Canada's economy is still among the strongest in the world in spite of all of its issues. It is regarded as one of the least corrupt nations in the world and boasts a stable democratic government, courteous and self-assured citizens, and a favorable economic climate. But for a long time, growth has lagged behind that of other developed economies, and the OECD predicts that this trend will not likely improve very soon.